Sveiki! Šiandien tinklalaidė DnA+, pakviesiu pokalbį su vienos žinomiausių architektų studijų pasaulyje, MVRDV, partnerė, architektė Fokke Moerel. Ji Vilniuje apsilankė žurnalo STRUCTUM organizuotoje konferencijoje. Tad šiandien pakalbėsime apie įspūdingiausius jų projektus, jų kūrybos užkulisius ir kaip jiems sekasi įgyvendinti vieną ambicingiausių savo tikslų – padaryti pastatus 100% tvarius. So hello Fokke, it's so nice to finally have you here. You are a part of the Smart City jury for the second year in a row. You were also participating in one of STRUCTUM conferences online, if I remember it correctly. Mm-hmm. And now we finally have you here in person.
Exactly. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course.
Indeed. So I told this morning at the lecture, thank you very much for inviting me again, because now I understand where I'm at and not just on a screen. So that's so much nicer, of course, to understand who you're talking to and where you are. So
yeah,
thank you.
Is this your first time in Lithuania?
Actually, it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so also, of course, then in Vilnius. So it was very nice already to be able to walk around it a little bit, and of course here in a historic city, to get a bit of a feel.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, because I don't know if you've managed to see much already, but I wanted to ask you, what's your first impression of the city?
Yeah, no, of course, the first impression is always the first, so you cannot change that. Indeed, yesterday we had some time to walk around, and today we moved around, let's say, so some parts, and very superficial. It's nice to see this sort of grandeur on the one hand, like really large buildings with a good history, and on the other side, the more intimate streets maybe of the historic district. So it's you can really see that there's a history indeed of many different layers, and that's I think that goes with a city like this. So it's we had an opportunity to see a few of those objects. Let's say the theater and the sports palace on the other side, which is vacant, but also indeed the university, etc. So many, and a beautiful white tower. Don't know what it's called. Sorry, in the historic center. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really glad that you liked it. It's a shame that we don't have any MVRDV projects yet in Vilnius, but I was wondering if you ever participated in any competitions in the Baltic region.
Yeah.
Or perhaps you already have some projects over here.
No, actually we don't. So yes, I also regret that part. So I hope that's going to change very soon, because it's a very interesting region, I think, and there's a lot of opportunities I see. So we hope indeed to get acquainted with the region much more. That's also why I'm here. And we traveled here before, well, not just me, but other people from our office. And we have just recently, end of last year, we entered one of the competitions for the CBD area for an office building, and that was, I think, a quite nice entry. We didn't win, unfortunately, but
that was in Vilnius?
That was here, yeah. So we're exploring. So it's interesting to see.
So you've traveled around the world, you've seen so many places. I was wondering, could you tell me, in your opinion, what kind of qualities good architecture and good city planning has to have?
Wow, that's a very broad, very broad question. But maybe to come back to a discussion we actually just had coming to this place here, is there's very often there can be high quality architecture, but then there might also be, and I think that's a bit the case also in Vilnius, that there's a bit lack of holistic view on the city, and so indeed the urban planning or the strategic planning, I think, is something that for us in the Netherlands is a very common thing to look at cities as a whole, and it really creates, or it urges a city also to really think of what the future would be and how to plan it in a broader sense, not just residences here, offices there, but and then a bit of leisure there, but to really see how people move around, what you do with your green, what you do with the riverside, for instance, what you do with your historic legacy. So these kind of layers are very important to try and connect. And so if that works in the city, then you feel more at ease, I think, more at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Now let's talk about one of your latest projects, The Valley, that was finished last year. How did you come up with this extraordinary design?
Well, it's never one person, of course. So it's always collaboration. First of all, with the client and the other stakeholders. If they're there, they're always stakeholders. If they're just your neighbors or maybe people who also invest. But so there we were in front of a question from urbanistically, like how do you deal with a expansion of a city into a region which is not a residential area, and so it's our financial district. It's not a very big one, but it's a very typical environment where after 6 nothing happens anymore. And to have to build or come up with a residential project, that was the biggest challenge. There we created indeed, all the programs that need to be there, like the commercial part, of course, the parking garage underneath, and a mixed use of office and commercial, as I said, but also the apartments. But then it's organized horizontally, yes, but at the same time we try to connect to the location because we know it's going to expand. So trying to make a little city within a city, or a little neighborhood actually within a building, that was a question there. And many questions of course afterwards, like how do you create an individual homes and not looking at your neighbor too closely. And that's why we indeed started to carve these very simple towers as it started into this valley as we have it now, and how you can still connect the upper terraces with the street life, and also have more street life just by adding furniture or terraces also on the ground level. So trying to make this puzzle in a vertical sense.
Mm-hmm. So people are already living there?
Yes, yeah.
How different is their everyday life in comparison to, living in a standard apartment block?
I hope that they feel connected, they feel at home, and that there's indeed, although it's a bit outside of the city center, that they feel that there's enough to connect to. And of course, if you walk out the door there, it's not the historic city of Amsterdam, so that is very different. But there's much more to do. There's sports, and the green. So it's comfortable. There's a lot of activity, and all your amenities that you need. So I hope it gives more than just an average apartment building.
Mm-hmm. Both to the people living there and probably to the city.
Exactly, that's a very good point, because it's not just meant for the people who live there, but it's also to bring other people in, and to make sure that it's more than just a lobby space, for instance, downstairs. It really is. It's not just a one little grocery store on the corner, but it's indeed part of the city.
Another research project that has received so much attention worldwide is the Vigo, where MVRDV built this colorful futuristic hotel. So what was the main idea behind this research?
Yeah, well, it's actually one of the first. There's some topics, let's say, within the office that already started way when the office started to exist, which this year is actually 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, the founding partners, Winnie, Jacob and Natalie, grouped to enter the Europan in Berlin for an inner city site, close to a railway station, close to busy and dense inner city location. And they designed residential tower. That was a brief, and you can see there that it's never been built, but they won, and so that was the reason to start up a firm. Like, okay, it works. Let's do more collaboration. But that was a residential tower, but really trying to indeed identify how you can still live in a high dense area in a vertical way, and yet feel that it's your place, this feeling of belonging, and that you can actually point at what your apartment is. It was a puzzle in section to see how apartments could actually fill, and one apartment would be 3 levels high but very narrow, and the other one would be the opposite, more horizontal, or would be in a cross shape, or so everybody would be able to choose basically in what type of home they would like to live. And that has been the start for this one topic within the office. Density is one, also housing for everybody, but the comfortable housing within inner cities. That has been, indeed, it started as this competition, and it's been a research project ever since. So indeed, the colorful one, the installation, which was done with, and many moments in between, very often were done with different universities, for instance, to really get new and fresh ideas, but every time evolving and developing further, like how could you live in the tallest tower, but still, and many next to each other, for instance, but still have enough daylight and still have place to go outside and still have this greenery. And so that's it's been an evolving, and every time it has a little detour, and every time we use, of course, this knowledge and experiment in our projects.
Well, I think that's really great, because architecture is not fixed. You know, it's constantly evolving depending on what people need. So, I mean, this flexibility is one of the most important things, I guess.
Yeah, it's flexibility and giving diversity, first of all. Therefore, I mean, we also then give it a color. That's not always the case, but it's just indicating, it's more like a diagram, if you will, to show that, you know, these differences are good and they're opportunities. And it's indeed, we try to create spaces for everybody and not just for a niche market. So we indeed go from high-end to, you know, the social housing, if we talk about residencies, and to advocate that, we do these kind of research projects and start to maneuver and move with the trends, of course.
Yeah, and probably they help you with the developing other projects that you actually build.
Yes, yeah. One of the earlier projects also is the Silodam in Amsterdam as well. It's a former harbor area. It's a very vast building. It looks like a container ship maybe, but there we really try to find, from social housing to mid level to high level housing, to find sort of to create little neighborhoods within the vast building. So there also you see quite colorful neighborhoods, but every time adding a type of common space to it. So sometimes it's the widening of the corridor, just as a little means of, it doesn't always have to be expensive, but just a space where you can put a little pot of plants or have a little table so you can meet your neighbor, and adding a big tribune on the outside there as well, to always emphasize this, that people meet each other. Coincidentally or on purpose, but that's for them to choose. Yeah, it can
totally be done with these little things sometimes.
Yeah, so these kind of, I don't know, in-between spaces, I think are very necessary also in an ever denser environment. You just need to have an escape room sometimes and work with climate. So yes, the culture and the location really, of course, also work with that. We try to explore where are we and where are the opportunities within each location every time again.
Finally, a part of these extraordinary buildings, you also design simpler projects like individual houses. So one of them I'd like to talk about is the Villa Stardust in Rotterdam.
Yeah, it's very close to Rotterdam. Yes.
Yeah, it seems simple, but I know that it's a highly sustainable building. So could you tell me a little bit about the idea behind it?
Yeah, well, highly sustainable. I think the sustainability in architecture is in essence actually a contradiction. Building is not sustainable in itself, so how to minimize your footprint, and I think keeping the building to whichever structure is already sustainable in itself, and that was indeed, it's in the outskirts, let's say, of it's a little village annexed to by Rotterdam City, and the first time I went there, the client was like, yeah, actually we bought this object, but we don't really know what to do with it. It's just really big and it was cheap, and but now we need to make it home out of this. So it was indeed quite a shock to step in, because at that moment it's 900 square meters, and it's just one, and it has just one facade. So the rest is built in. And so it was very introverted, and it had two really tiny little patios, but at that moment it was all cubicles, so it was one big office space, and I really don't understand how people could work there, but they did for a long time. But it was quite extraordinary that the client actually had this vision of like, okay, if I just take everything out, it could become a home. And it was a very good vision, because indeed now we opened up the patios, connecting the two, making really a big big garden in the middle, and all the spaces are oriented towards it. So it's not oriented to the outside, but really to the inside. And so yeah, keeping the building first of all, I think and of course it needed upgrades, so there's all kinds of new systems in there, like a heat pump, etc., and a smart ventilation system, natural ventilation, of course, which was actually quite a puzzle still, because it's built in. And trying to really focus on the patio itself, being, let's say, the gem of the home. Always being able to open up and go outside straight away, and have sort of crisscross moments through the patio instead of going all the way around. It needed some work, and it needed sort of a vision. So it started with the client, and you don't see it from the outside, so it's very modest in that sense.
Yeah,
I think that's indeed simple. It's simple. It's definitely not an icon, but if you come there, you really feel a sense of place.
And it shows perfectly how it doesn't need to be an icon building. It can be a simple building to actually do wonderful things, and then
exactly. Yeah, that's. I hope indeed we, as an office, are very much recognized for, of course, the icons and the high end. Yeah, I totally understand, but there's a whole range that we try to take care of. So we don't specialize. That's not very handy if you want to be efficient, but it's always a challenge. So that's really something that we have, I think, in our DNA, to always challenge the client and the location and the brief, and to find the priorities there, and that indeed that does not always end up as an icon. That's and I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad so.
Not every project has to be an icon.
No, that would be. They were out of work pretty soon.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing about all these projects, your wonderful ideas and the thinking behind. I think it's one thing for us to see everything being done, and then completely different to hear the thinking behind. So to sum up this conversation, I'd like to ask you a couple of more questions about how MVRDV and how you work.
Yeah.
So in one of the interviews you mentioned that MVRDV is aiming to make buildings 100% sustainable. How is that going for you?
Yeah, that's a beautiful statement, and of course it's super urgent, and everybody knows it. So it's something you cannot go around. What is 100%? That's a bit the question, of course, but we wanted to just challenge ourselves really there to say, okay, we're going to really do this, and therefore we approach it in many different ways. We, as I already explained, we do a lot of social projects and public places, so public realm. So that is one part of being sustainable. We do transformations. I think that is really a good way to start, and to indeed first look at what's there already and can we keep. And maybe it was not a historic place, it doesn't need to be listed, but it can, as a monument, let's say, but what's there, you need to not just take for granted, and understand how much space you take from our scarce planet. Also in terms of density, really be smart in how you use the area that we have, and keep the secure parts that we have still for either nature originally or new nature. So those are topics that we have in our DNA, I think, from the start of the office. The certificates, the SDGs, we of course always try to embed and negotiate or discuss with the clients or the city what can we prioritize, and it's not always everything. So the 100% is of course the ideal, but you always have to see what really makes sense in a specific spot or location, or with a brief and of course a budget.
I was wondering what kind of challenges do you face trying to make
many, like all architects and everybody. That's for instance, we would love to really make so many more projects just in timber, but then regulation and budgets are always still limiting, which is of course, so the legislation is going too slow. So some laws really need to be changed. For instance, in timber you can only, and it varies per region or per country, how tall you can actually go, but very often it's just like 1, 2, 3 layers maybe. But yeah, I mean, you see in Canada they go way higher. Exactly. In Sweden they have like a 10-story buildings. So it needs that urgency apparently goes faster in some disciplines and slower in others. So we try to approach it in all these different ways, and always indeed from the start of a project see with the carbon footprint, with the use of materials, with also as design tools, and not just as a bad thing that you have to implement, but really something that you want to play with and use as a benefit, of course, for your projects, make them be more beneficial and also more beautiful. So that's it needs a lot of different perspectives, otherwise we're not getting there.
Mm-hmm. And finally, I'm eager to know, how do you see the architecture and urban design evolving in the upcoming years?
Well, I hope indeed into this more sustainable direction. And just to add to that previous question also is that within our office we have many groups of specialists. We're large enough now to really have the nerds, let's say, to either design a facade or design an interior, but also, of course, to design very sustainable principles. So within the office we have a group Next and Climate, and there they really focus on what is the newest on the market in terms of material. We try to develop our own software for carbon footprint, so we try to monitor really from the start of projects what can be done and what kind of sizing do you need and how can you really use it as a design tool. And I hope that's also going to be development within the urban planning, that you understand where to put the priorities and how to be sustainable from the start and not just add it at the end as a label or a certificate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was very interesting to listen, and I think there's so much to learn for us, especially this approach that things can be done differently and they can be done better, so we shouldn't settle for anything less. I think that's what MVRDV stands for. Exactly, that's the 100%.
Thank you very much.
It was really a pleasure having you here, and let's hope so that MVRDV soon has some projects in Lithuania, and then
yes,
we'll see each other again.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you.
Thank you.